seals. First, this is our first cylinder seal that we're looking at, and I'll tell you a little bit how to look at these seals. First of all, this is the impression rolled into clay, and this is some cuneiform script. This is always, or usually, going to represent the owner of the seal. These were used like stamps, so that your name was on it, and you chose like a motif of a historical story, a religious thing, something like that, to make it colorful and impressive. They created these seals as a negative onto a jewel which was hardened, and then they rolled it on clay or stone or something that they could impress upon clay. And no one really knows how they created them because they were created as negatives. But they always have interesting information in them. First, we see 4 humans here drinking beer from a straw. Yeah, the Sumerians created beer. They actually recorded over 200 different recipes for beer. They loved beer. Now, first of all, we know this is the Earth and the Moon. This is a star, but it's 8-pointed, so we think it represents Venus. And the number 8, I'll explain later why 8 would be Venus. Here's Mars, here's Jupiter. Oh my, what is this? Saturn. With rings? Hello, you can't see Saturn with rings unless you have binoculars at least of 10 or 15 power. There's no other ancient depiction I can find anywhere that has rings other than this. This is a very unique piece on this planet. And this is also unusual. The straw is in between Mars and Jupiter. Now what's in between Mars and Jupiter? Well, it's the asteroid belt. Are they saying that this is the asteroid belt? No. But it is consistent with where the asteroid belt really is, isn't it? See, a lot of what we're going to see tonight, is it consistent with what we're familiar with? Is it consistent with what we know? Or is it opposite with what we know? I wouldn't talk about the straw if it was over here. I wouldn't talk about it if it was over here. But it happens to be consistently in the place where the asteroid belt really is. And I think that's interesting, because it is showing Saturn with rings. Maybe it is talking about the asteroid belt. We don't know. There's nothing else on here to indicate that they are trying to make more of, give you more information than just the simple, like, this is our local neighborhood. Here's another religious, astrological or astronomical type of seal. First of all, this is the first, now we're seeing gods. How do we know they're gods? They're on animals. They also have usually funny hats. Okay? Why are they on animals? To show that they're lofty. They're higher than humans. They're lifted above. Notice they look pretty normal. They look humanoid. They're not shown as anything other than humanoid. We have more stuff in the sky here. Here's a winged disc. Very popular motif. 7 dots. Another looks like 8-pointed, 8-pointed star and a crescent moon. Again, then we have this object, this conical shaped object that's in the middle on this thing. And then we have this lady here with this kind of claw that we think is a medical device that's shown in other pictures being used for either births to cut umbilical cords and things like that. This 7 dots throughout archaeology for several hundred years has been thought to be the Pleiades, the 7 sisters. Zechariah is the first researcher to say the 7 actually represents Earth, which makes no sense, but we'll see later on a tablet why 7 possibly could be Earth. It's very different than any other historian archaeologist is saying. Most people who would come here who don't believe that would say that that's the Pleiades, but we know it's going to be Earth, and we're going to see why. Also, we're going to see that somehow this shape becomes a common motif in ancient depictions. This is the victory stela of Naram Sin. It is pretty old. 2300 BC, he was a king in Acadia. We have them going to war against this object, being afraid of this object, conquering this object, praying to this object. This god guy has horns on his hat. We will see that horns usually depicts one of the gods. We have some astronomical things up here with multiple rays coming out. Usually if it's 12, it represents a certain god named Anu. The different numbers of petals or leaves coming out will determine which god they're trying to revere or pay homage to in the picture. But once again, we see this shape becoming extremely important in this culture. And here is an example of a king or god taking credit at least for a victory in battle. This is a, oh, and by the way, that covers part of what's called the wars of gods and men. Because this guy, who's probably a god, is leading the war, as a general would. He's there up front leading the humans. This is a drawing of pieces that are in the British Museum once again. They have full-size wall reliefs. They're 6 to 7 feet tall. They have a hallway that has both walls covered. And on this wall is Assyrian depictions of battle and different things. But in the text that describes the battle, the god was helping them to win the war. And the god used special devices or weapons called missiles, but I mean, it doesn't say missiles. We translate it as missiles because they're showing these things. Now, they're depicting shields and swords and arrows in this and all other depictions. They have accurate pictures of every aspect of war, but they also have these missile-looking objects that are flying around and described as the weapon the god used to help them. And again, a story where the god was physically involved in the war that the humans were fighting. Not just as a fantasy, but in their case, accrediting the god with winning that battle. There's a story of Alexander the Great as well, of a ray of light that came off of a shield in the sky and knocked a wall down and let Alexander the Great's army go through a certain city. It's common to see those stories of the gods involved in ancient wars that the humans fought. But when you see a recreation in a movie like the story of Troy, Helen of Troy, gods were involved in that whole mess as well in the actual Greek mythology. But they never show you that in the movie. But that's what the true story says, or the original story. Here's more pictures of these kind of cone objects, again with stars around them to show that we're talking about something that has to do with sky. Look here, more star symbols, and this little guy inside this little chamber. Knows what that is, something that's flying in the sky. It's a side view, it could be just a scratch. Now these could be nothing, or they can be consistent with what we've already seen. Reverence to this type of shape, connecting this type of shape with their gods, connecting it with stars, and them simply recording what they saw in front of them. Simple and easy to translate the information, to send it through the thousands of years. They simply drew what they saw. This is in Egypt. Tomb of Hoi on the wall. It's an incredible piece here, and this is, of course, the drawing of it. The first, you'll notice there's something above here, and there's something below. Above is people facing away from the center coned object. Once again, it's the centerpiece of the drawing. They are praying and not facing it, because it's godly, because it represents their gods, and don't face it directly. Face away, pray away, and there's even giraffes facing away, and giraffes are kind of rare to be seen in old depictions as well. Now, from what we're familiar with from technology, and I grew up, looking at the Apollo program and what NASA's done, and they used the technology of heat shields to come back and have their, capsules come down and absorb the heat and not burn up. And what you would see if the heat shield was used would be scratches and chips, and it's just like here. It's not a perfectly drawn shield. It has straps here that are clamping this on in case you have to get rid of it for some reason. You want to get rid of it. So it looks like technology here with like an understanding that they simply saw something that had been used. It's not perfect. It's not pristine. They're not showing this object that has no flaws. That would be godlike. They're showing a reality-based picture. They're simply drawing what they saw. Down here we have things that look like gears. Here we have these shower-looking things. And here we have guys holding hoses. These guys are doing maintenance. You're seeing technology. You're seeing work to clean up or repair or refuel whatever's going on here. And then we have these things here that look like exhaust ports. Now, I've seen a picture from an underground silo from a Titan missile. And exhaust is used in a modern way the same way this picture depicts. The exhaust has to be exported to the side. This could be heat or filters on the side here. And what's beautiful is that you can go to Egypt, you can go to the Tomb of Hoi, you can see it for yourself. Don't trust this drawing. Go see it with your own eyes. Take your pictures from every angle. Do the research on your own. Decide for yourself if it's showing a rocket, if it's showing technology, if it's showing something real. At least you'll know where to go now to see it. I'll tell you, this is the kind of thing that excites me. I can't wait to get back to Egypt. There's a lot of stuff to see. And you have a lot of these things. You see these in Egypt as well. Little characters, godlike beings, inside of these capsule-looking objects looking out of the window. Very common. These were put on top of pyramids and other memorials, and it's usually the top stone, the capstone. But it's just something that pops up all the time. Again, is it consistent with what we know? Or is it completely off the wall and it has nothing to do with anything we're familiar with? Another reference to this cone-shaped object, Phoenician cone, showing this object seated on a platform surrounded by a wall and a giant temple surrounding this. Now, we think that this location they're talking about is Baalbek, Lebanon, and we're going to see some pictures from Baalbek. And the Romans built the biggest temple in the empire on the Baalbek site, the Temple of Jupiter. Bigger than anything that was even in Italy, was done on this site. And it was wholly, okay, this site, and when you see it, you'll be, I hope, amazed. The Baalbek site existed before any record of anything existed. It's always been there. And again, that same object. This is a funny piece. Zechariah talks about this piece in the Earth Chronicles expeditions. This was a piece found in Turkey that the museum director thought was a fake, even though it was found 16 feet below the mud. So it was a fake that was done thousands of years ago, because they were digging for archaeological records and tablets and stuff that they found in the area along with this. This is the drawing of this little thing. There's a little guy in here with his knees up. His head is kind of broken, like chipped off. It has these little three things in the back. Zechariah shows this with the little space shuttle thing, but it looks like a one-man sort of escape pod or one-man shuttle. Zechariah went to the director of the museum, asked for this piece. He denied it was there. He went to lunch. Zechariah sat for 2 to 3 hours, never left. The museum guy took it out of his drawer that was behind his desk. He said, "Why don't you display it?" The director says, "Well, it's a fake." "How do you know it's a fake?" "Well, we don't have anything else like it anywhere. It's an original piece. We as a museum cannot show an original piece." Zechariah was astonished. He said, "What if I can prove to you that there's other things like this? Will you display it?" And he said, "Well, okay, I'll do it." So Zechariah went home and sent him pictures from all over the world of rocket ship type little objects. And they now displayed on the museum. No one's been there in a couple years. They display the museum with the little note on the bottom that says, "We think it's a fake." I mean, it's just incredible. Here's a piece that they could, you want to increase revenue to your museum? Advertise in UFO magazines and other places around the world that you have evidence and people will come to see it. But instead, status quo, we don't want to rock the boat, we can't deviate from other museums, they'll think of us, who knows. I hope it's still there. We have a lot of people did go to see it after Zechariah first wrote about it and confirmed it. That was there back then. Now we come to a very impressive cylinder seal. This is in East Berlin. It's cylinder seal VA 243. And what is showing in the seal is very interesting. First again, we have the name of the owner of the seal. We have the God, and we know that this is Enki from the text. And God is seated on this chair. And notice he's as tall as these humans, but he's also seated. He has a horned hat. So we know he's a God. This is a God, and there's a human. What are they doing? You see the guy's arms? He's giving. He's giving to mankind the plow. This culture didn't say that they invented the plow. The king did not take credit for it. Their stories said the gods gave them the plow. And here's the picture that backs up what the texts are talking about. So we have the same story in two forms, visual form and a textual form. Once again, their God is shown as a humanoid-looking character with eyes and a nose and a beard. But he's extremely tall. If he was to stand up, he would be a little bit gigantic. Now, are we really to believe that humans did not create the plow and some aliens gave us knowledge of how to farm? Well, here's where the evidence gets interesting, because this piece of information here is well beyond, again, 4,500 years ago. It should not exist. Nobody should know or have this information or be able to depict this. First of all, what is in the center? A star, the sun, our sun. Do you all remember when you were children how you used to draw the sun? Because I drew it like this, with rays coming off of it. And by the way, there's a lot of depictions of suns with rays coming off, or stars with rays coming off, or planets with stuff coming off. So that's not an unusual. Also, it happens to be the Star of David, six-pointed star. If you take away the globe, it's just like this. A triangle here, a triangle there. It's one of the oldest depictions of the Star of David that I can find. Now, I know from, of course, studying this piece, that this shows every planet that we know of in our solar system today, and I'll show you how it is set up. The reason it shows, and there's also 12 objects here, we'll talk about 12 for a second. 12 objects because every god was represented by an astrological symbol or object. So they counted the sun. There was the god who was the sun god. They had a moon god. So the sun and the moon, the 9 planets is 11, and they talked about an extra planet, which Steve mentioned was called Nibiru, the planet of crossing. Here is the Earth and the moon. Now, it's not going in order, so don't think that they're trying to tell you how the solar system is really aligned. The important thing is that whoever the scribe got the information from to draw this picture told him what to do and how many to put. This is the Earth and the moon. This is Mercury and Venus. This is Uranus, Neptune, and this is Pluto. This is Mars. This is this extra planet Nibiru. This is Jupiter and Saturn. So across the top, here and here. So we have every object identified that we know of today. And Pluto was not discovered till the 1930s. Uranus and Neptune were the 1800s. Yet here is all of them depicted. Over here is now the asteroid belt. So if we were to draw this, we would show little pieces of rocks broken up here. What's interesting is they show a planet over here. Now, are they saying that the asteroid belt used to be a planet and now we look at it and it's not, the planet was destroyed? Probably not, because this piece is only 4,500 years old. The asteroid belt is obviously millions of years old. Based on the trajectory of individual asteroids, if it was less, we would see more of them flying off, but they're pretty consistently staying in their orbit. So we think what they're telling us is that when that planet of theirs, that their gods told them they came from, is close to Earth, it shows up between Jupiter and Mars. So maybe the asteroid belt is a leftover pieces of something that was hit in that place where this planet would come by. But again, this knowledge of a sun-centered solar system should not exist, well, before Copernicus. Although there was a Greek astronomer and mathematician who also calculated the Earth was not in the center, the sun was, but of course they didn't go with his theory. They went with the theory of what you can observe, that it seems that the Earth is still and everything moves around us. Nobody in school, was anybody here taught in school that the ancients knew the sun was in the center? Okay, good, because I wasn't either. So this piece should not exist. You should not have any diagram anywhere in the ancient world that shows the sun in the center. It's one of the best pieces on planet Earth that there was advanced knowledge given to primitive humans. I'm not saying that everyone in society knew this information. What's interesting about the ancient world is that the religious information was astronomical information. The cycles of the moon, the orbits of the planets, that was the knowledge that they were keeping. That was the special priest knowledge and the religious knowledge. It wasn't of what we think of today. This is the information that the gods gave them, and that's what they prized above everything. To keep a record of that, they depicted it and drew it, so that for further civilizations and people would remember it. This is, they call the planisphere. This is, again, a piece that's in the British Museum on their permanent collection. It's always going to be on display. Well, first of all, we see that it's obviously clay, yet it's been smoothed out here and melted here. So some weird stuff is going on in this. Let's talk about some things and pieces of information that are on here. And by the way, this I consider the most important piece on planet Earth, because it tells a story. First, you have this little shape here, which looks like an ellipse. It should not exist, again, because the ancients were not supposed to have known about the shape of the true planets that path around the sun. It's not a circle. It's a double foci here. 2 points of rotation around. We have a thing here that looks like a constellation with an arrow pointing here. Here we have 3 intersecting lines with an arrow pointing here. And here we have a triangle with an arrow pointing here. Now we're going to look at a drawing of this thing so we can get some more detail. Here's the ellipse. Here's the constellation, which looks like Orion to me, pointing here. Here's the 3 intersecting lines coming here. Now, to navigate in a three-dimensional space, you need 7 coordinates. This is how it works. You need an originating point or a destination point that's 1. So let's say I'm starting from here and I'm going there. How do I get there in space? You have to connect 6 points. 2 stars, 2 stars, 2 stars, and you draw lines. 3 intersecting lines from 6 coordinate points, and now you know where you're going or where you came from. This is a tablet that's of course written on a 2-dimensional surface, which shows 3 intersecting lines and an originating point over here. This shows the ability to navigate in 3 dimensions. It's not supposed to exist. This cannot be if we've been told the correct story of the order of our history. But obviously it does exist, and that's why I recommend everyone go see it for themselves, with your own eyes. Here we have the story that we're going to translate, this piece of the pie here. We think this is saying that they came from a mountainous planet, this direction, and they made a course correction between Dilgon and Apin. They came here. This is the sky above Earth. It was called the Way of Enlil. Here is the sun, and then there's 3 planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth. So here they're showing that this is the 3rd planet from the sun. But what did they say over here? The deity Enlil, the god Enlil, went by the planets. And how many planets did he go by? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wait a second. 7. Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Earth. That's where Zechariah figured out why they called Earth the 7th planet. Because they came from the outside of our solar system and came inward. If you're born on planet Earth, we are the 3rd rock from the sun. If you come from outside the solar system, we are the 7th planet of orbit that you pass by. A NASA scientist tells Zechariah at a seminar that this was the piece that convinced him that Zechariah was correct. Because Earth could never be called the 7th in any stretch of the imagination to anybody who's been here and lived here. This word kabab is, in Hebrew, the root of the word kochav. So kakab became kochav, star in Hebrew. But in Sumerian, kakab means, well, that's the argument. To me, it means astronomical object. It doesn't mean necessarily star. It could be planet, it could be star, it could be asteroid. And there's a disagreement with the archaeologists when they're studying the Nibiru, because it's called Kakab Nibiru. So they think, oh, maybe that's the name of the Milky Way galaxy, maybe it's a constellation. And there's a slight mistranslation with the word Kakab. Dilgon thinks it was Jupiter, Zechariah thinks it's Jupiter and Mars, so he thinks this is a course correction in the asteroid belt. They had to navigate through the asteroid belt before they got to Earth. Again, this is why I think it's one of the most important pieces on Earth, because it also details the fact that there was knowledge of planets that we didn't discover till 100 years ago or so. Okay. All right, come on, am I crazy? I'm sure some people think so. Are we really talking that they knew about rockets, fuel-based technology? This is man's greatest creation in space from a takeoff point of view, the space shuttle. Flame, fire, smoke, heat. If everyone's seen a launch, all the animals run. The sound is supposedly one of the loudest ever created by humans. What's interesting is this. The Sumerians didn't just leave behind pictures. They left behind textual descriptions. Gilgamesh is the oldest literary tale that we have a complete record for. 16 tablets long, the whole story. Gilgamesh is searching for immortality. The date of Gilgamesh is 3500 BC for the completed works. Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk, in Hebrew, Erech. It should be the root of my name there. Okay, and Gilgamesh he thought he deserved immortality because he was 2/3 divine. Because his mother was a Anunnaki female, or a goddess. His father was the priest and the king of Uruk. So that indicated to us that 2/3 divine meant that more of the DNA of the mother is used, and so you could become, it's a predominance of you, if you're making it by your mother. Jewish people, they go by the mother if the person is Jewish. And that comes from the Sumerian way of looking at things. Also, Gilgamesh was the first to be claimed as a hybrid being. His father was a god, his mother was a goddess, and his father was a human. He's the oldest, but he's not the only one. It's a common theme throughout history. All of the pharaohs of Egypt had to be sanctioned to be from the seed of a god to be able to rule. You could not rule without the god connection. Gilgamesh is on his journey for immortality. He's traveling with a friend, Enkidu. He thinks he's having a dream. His third dream, his limbs are paralyzed. The heavens cried out, earth roared. Daylight vanished and darkness issued forth. Lightning flashed, fire broke out. Clouds swelled, it rained death. And the glow disappeared, the fire went out, and all that had fallen turned to ashes. Does that match what you would think that you would see if you saw the shuttle being launched if you were nearby? Is any of his description not consistent with a rocket launch? Is there any part of this that is in disagreement with what you would describe when you saw a rocket launch? Daylight, darkness, fire flash, smoke and ash. That's the beauty of this kind of data. You may have a picture of a rocket ship, and you don't know if you can believe your eyes. Then all of a sudden the text surprises you and you find a description that matches the same event. Textual evidence is the recorded history, and visual evidence is the recorded history in a visual form. So you can put them together. Now you could think that this is fantasy and this is really a dream. But once again, you still have to answer the questions, how about that advanced knowledge they had? Precession, mathematics, the planets of the solar system, and more stuff. This is me on Malta. I think it's next to Gigantea, the biggest temple on Malta. And this is also the biggest cut stone on Malta. Okay, why do humans have to work with giant stones? Why not just use these little stones over here? They're so easy to move around. What is the point? Who thinks that this is a big stone? You do? Okay, great. Thank you. Somebody does. It is a big stone. I felt pretty small next to it. But it's not the biggest stone on earth. Because this is child's play for people who use giant stones and move them around like we do a deck of cards. This is the biggest cut stone on earth. 35 people are standing in front of a single stone that is cut and sticking out of the quarry even today. This is the area of Baalbek, Lebanon. This is the area where that little coin showed that object sitting on the platform. And this is 1.5 miles away from where 3 of these stones are actually in place on the plateau of this platform. Now, if you're a giant and you get 10 of your buddies around together, can you lift this stone? It's over 1,100 tons. We cannot lift it today except straight up and straight down. We cannot move the stone today with our technology. And yet this is 1.5 miles away from where 3 of them are in place already. But they're not in place at the bottom where the small stones are. They're not in place in the middle where the medium stones are. They are at the top. From 1.5 miles away quarry. Who needs to work with such stones? What is the purpose of using gigantic stones? It just makes your life more difficult. And the construction even more difficult. But what's the purpose of it? What do you need it for? If you're launching a rocket and you have fire and smoke and exhaust coming out, you have to absorb it somehow. And you know what? This is a perfect natural way to do that. You don't go to Earth and bring your You go to Earth and you find what you need on the planet and you use the resources. You take your tools and you build what you need. And Baalbek is a giant stone platform. And you know what? Stone is made from extremely high temperature. So it could absorb exhaust from a rocket and protect the civilization that's around that. Most ancient temples are sort of round with an opening in the middle, so that something could land in them and not be seen once it's landed. And also to protect the people from smoke and debris and other things. When the Temple of Solomon, the first holy temple that is in the Bible, that the God of the Bible was instructed Solomon to build, when they finally initiated the temple, God of the Bible appeared and went to this temple. But the cloud and smoke from the God arriving chased everyone out of the temple. They couldn't stay in it while that, whatever that was that the God was traveling in, came in. They had to run away. This is something that nobody can visit anymore for the moment. It's in Baalbek, Lebanon, where Hezbollah probably has a training camp still. There was a small opportunity when there was peace in the 90s for a while, and Zechariah took a tour group and went there. Now there's houses that are right here, so you can't get a clear, wide picture of this thing. They basically have built, civilization has built up to the edge of this temple. But it's an incredible sight. And then if there's ever a chance to get to Baalbek, Lebanon, please go, if it's possible. Okay. These are some of the oldest figures that we see in around the year 3500 to 4000 BC. They're definitely very alien looking. These characters carried wands. They're called Ubakian or Ubakian figures. But they are also described in the text of what they were used for. They were used as not like an android, but more like a medical servant. They were instrumental when Inanna was killed for 3 days. They came down and resurrected her after 3 days. They had with them knowledge that apparently a lot of knowledge stored in what devices were called the me. The me was a handheld, we think of it like a chip, where it had instructions and information on it. And there's a story of Inanna, we're going to see pictures of Inanna later, of stealing a handful of these chips, and they weren't able to do certain operations. And then she was followed all over Africa and different places before she gave up the chips. And that's also how she died in the story. These characters were sent down to fix her, to diagnose the issue, the problem, and to medically heal her. Some people think they look reptilian. I and Zechariah definitely do not believe in the reptilian theory of anything. There's a lot of depictions of demons and other kind of beings that are fantastical. But all the depictions of the gods are humanoid looking. All the descriptions of what they were doing had human behavior and traits. And these characters are described. And they're not any of the leading class or ruling class. They are simply programmable beings. Okay, now we're seeing a picture of Anu, the chief god of the Sumerian pantheon. He's being attended to by two humans here. They look young, so they are short, but he's really tall. He also has a lot of ridges on his hat. And this is a 12-pointed star, so his symbol, that's Nibiru, 12. So he's the top of the pantheon. And there's also a picture of him and his wife together. There was no problem with the feminine or them depicting females. They had goddesses. It was some of their most popular gods were females or goddesses. Again, if he stood up, he would be really tall. This is in the museum, Syria Museum. Syria and Turkey have a lot of great information and stuff to see. And this is like about 6 feet tall. Inanna, the first bikini model in history. She was sexy. She was a seductress. This is an old piece as well. Inanna was talked about as, first of all, she was the granddaughter of the Anu, the character we just saw before. She was talked about as having a boat of heaven. She put on a full outfit of 7 different things that were described. She was the prototype of, her name was Inanna and Ishtar. Inanna is the root name of the name Ina, which is a popular Russian name, and Anna, or Anne. So that name has existed since the beginning, or those several names. Here is a life-size, 6-foot-tall statue of her, also in a Syrian museum in Aleppo. I'm sorry, in Mari. It's the Aleppo Museum in Mari in Syria. This is the front of her. Now, she's a princess, and she's supposed to be wearing a very elaborate headgear, but it's not very pretty. It really has very big shoulder pads, and has this horn thing here, and it's not really attractive, and she's holding this thing here. And let's see the back of her. Okay, it's not as clear, but the helmet here is very thick in back. We have a replica picture. This is from what you could buy if you go to their museum. It's a replica, like a souvenir. So it has this tube-like thing that we think is an air or breathing tube. Technology again. Here's the back of this helmet thing. Again, shoulder pads very thick, not very attractive, not a good headdress for a princess. Let's go back for a second to see the original and see if this makes sense. Now, if you were to see this and think about what I've just said without knowing how she was described, it wouldn't make sense. But she was not only described as a flyer, she was depicted. In this thing here, we are going to see a drawing of what we think it looks like. We think it's showing similar to like a World War I pilot's type outfit. Goggles, little symbols that have to do with flying or flags or whatever, and things like this. Now let's go back to the original. Here's these symbols like this, these colorful things. Here's these things sticking out. And by the way, this is a cylinder seal. This is a jewel that you could press into clay and it would make an image. Now, is she always depicted as a flyer like this? No. Because the motifs, she's very sexy. She has wings. She's trying to tempt you. She did a lot of tempting in the stories. But again, showing wings to denote flight. Not flight by magic, where you can just lift up and levitate. None of the gods were ever described to act that way. Every single description of flight had a vehicle or a vessel as part of the story. A boat of heaven, a divine bird, a shield of fire, and many other descriptions that are ancient in words because they didn't know what to say. The prototype of angels having wings is from this Mesopotamian motif of showing wings to denote flight. Here is the god Teshub, also named as Adad, the storm god. He's the prototype of the character Poseidon, the Greek ocean god, who carried a trident, also Neptune in the Roman pantheon. He's shown on a bull. This is again a full-size, 6-7 feet tall statue. They left behind incredible pieces to study. What's important is this. This character who was a storm god has the same description that you see in Greece. And then his motif of the trident appears in South America. Where? On the side of a mountain in Nazca, Peru. This is the hill. Nazca is a plateau, and if you are not familiar with Nazca, Peru, they are gigantic drawings on the ground that can only be seen from the air of animals, monkeys, birds, and other things, but you can't see them unless you're coming in at 1,500 feet. On the ground, it just looks like a scratch in the surface. Yet approaching this area is a trident of gigantic size. It shows a connection between some of these characters and our world. So they didn't just stay around. And the site of Nazca is like the ancient people. It's only, supposedly it's 1500 AD. But those people sort of inviting their gods to come back. It's like a landing zone. We're making animal pictures for you and we're inviting you back and this is where we want you to land. And a lot of them look like runway-like strips. Very, very geometric patterns. And here's the god Shamash, also known as Utu. What's funny is this is Hammurabi. Hammurabi is the first law code that is not Sumerian, but it is Akkadian. And he's receiving the law and its laws of crime and punishment, like, if you kill the ox and you pay this fine, or if, in this law code, some of the quotes appear later on in the Mosaic law, the Moses law, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Some of those sayings are in this law code. And here's a closer